Good evening, everybody. I'm Pat Hayden. Welcome to Cummer Amelia's first event of the 2020-2021 season. Lots different than our last year, but here we all are, and we're delighted to see you. We've missed you all. Before we begin, I have just a brief announcement about our next event on November 19th, a month from today. We're so excited to present our first ever virtual cooking class, November 19th, 6 p.m. with Chef's Garden, the Cummer Cafe's catering company. Following along with Jamie and Jen from the Chef's Garden, we will prepare coq au vin. It's a delicious and classic French stew in which chicken is braised slowly in red wine and a little brandy. Our entree will be accompanied by a haricot vert salad, and while dessert is not included, you can order it separately. The class ingredients for 2 entrees and delivery will be $85. It will include the cooking class. So we hope to see you, and registration is required. So please do that as soon as you are able. We're so excited about it, actually, that we're going to open it up to Cummer Beaches as well, and let them enjoy it too. A huge thanks tonight to Emily Moody, the museum's managing event and program coordinator who put this program together for us tonight, and to our liaison with the Cummer, gifts officer Hannah Oberholzer, who quite honestly keeps us all straight. Have you ever wondered how museums acquire art, all the art that is hanging on the Cummer's walls? Holly Keris, the J. Wayne and Delores Barr Weaver Chief Curator, is going to give us a behind-the-scenes look tonight into the museum's art acquisition process, as well as a sneak peek into its 2020-2021 exhibition season. Holly has worked tirelessly during this whole COVID-19 pandemic. She has worked so hard, and her leadership, because of her leadership, the Cummer Museum has been able to maintain all of the planned exhibits into 2023. Not an easy task. You will hear more about those this evening. Holly not only manages our indoor gardens, our indoor galleries, but also oversees our prestigious and historic gardens, which are among the most important works in our permanent collection. We are so lucky, Holly, to have you with us tonight, and so appreciative of the fact that you put this lecture together just for us at Cumber Amelia. Thank you. Without further ado, Holly Keris.
Thank you, Pat. Thank you, everyone. It's nice to be with you tonight. I'm going to put in a plug for your Cummer Amelia Cummer Beaches cooking class. If you haven't had the opportunity to cook with Chef's Garden at home before, it is a ton of fun. Don't be intimidated. They really do a wonderful job breaking everything down for you. It's a great way to spend an evening. So I would definitely encourage you all to think about it, because it's going to be a really great experience. But I know that that's not why you're here tonight. Emily, it says I can't share my screen. So we'll have a technical moment while Emily tries to get me hooked up with that. But yes, I am very excited to be here with you tonight and walk through how the museum acquires works of art. You know, it's largely a behind the scenes process, right? So unless you are intimately involved with the museum on one of our committees or on our board of trustees, you don't really get to see it. So I hope that this gives you a kind of a different way to think about your museum experience when you come to visit us, and also gives you an opportunity to, just to reconsider really how the museum comes together, right? We tend to hear about Nina Cummer and Arthur Cummer being the museum founders. But at nearly 60 years old, with 2021 being our 60th anniversary, you know, there's going to be, there were so many people who went into making the Cummer what we think of it as today. And that was actually one of Mrs. Cummer's greatest wishes. And she recognized in her last will and testament that, you know, what she thought she was doing by creating the museum was really leaving a very modest gift. And in her words, she recognized that if this were going to be a successful enterprise, that other people were going to have to get on board and start supporting the museum. And that's really what has happened over this 60-year trajectory. There have been many individuals, families, corporations who have all stepped up to really support the Cummer's vision on what they thought, what they hoped that an institution, that a museum could be for the Northeast Florida community. And so I like to think, you know, after having read a lot of Mrs. Cummer's writings and certainly all of her correspondence with her main dealer, who was based in London, that the version of today's museum and what we have become, both in terms of our art collection, but the gardens as well, and just then our place within the community, I really think that she would be just incredible, just incredibly grateful to see how the museum has really matured. And I think she would be amazed and just really so surprised, but surprised in a good way, right? Just so surprised to see how the museum has really grown and see how people have really embraced this kind of project that she decided to create really in the final years of her life. So we're having a bit of a technical snafu with getting you all to see my screen this evening. Ooh, now it's working. Okay, good job, Emily Moody. This is why we have an event and program manager. So hopefully you all can see my screen now. What you should be looking at then is not me. I should be over in the corner somewhere, but you should be looking at a really fantastic slide that says Art Acquisition at the Cumber Museum of Art and Gardens, and this featuring one of our most recent acquisitions that we will talk about a little bit later in the presentation. But it's always good to start at the beginning, right? And I was talking about the Cummer family. You've been to the museum before, you know the Tutor Room, of course. This is a photo from the Cummer residence when it was still a residence in 1958. So this was just about the time that Mrs. Cummer was passing away. And there was this beautiful photo documentary done of the house and the gardens. And yes, you see the Tudor Room today, you know, when that first board of trustees was really thinking about how to open a museum. You know, Mrs. Cummer had been buying art, but she hadn't been involved in deciding what to do with her home and the creation of the actual museum, right? She just created the foundation. That first board of directors decided to preserve the Cummer's parlor and tear down the house, and then purpose build what we call, of course, the Tutor Room today inside the footprint of the museum to really commemorate the Cummer's contribution to the organization. So this is how their parlor would have looked while Mrs. Cummer was alive. Mr. Cummer predeceased her by about 15 years. And so you can see here on the walls some of the things that you know, the Cummers lived with. And I think that's an important reminder in this. We're used to coming to the museum today, and it's an institution. You know, in Mrs. Cummer's words, it's a center of beauty and culture for all the people of Jacksonville, which is wonderful. So there's always people running around, big and small. But It's a gallery space. We, for the most part, we have fairly neutral color walls. We have institutional lighting. But when Mrs. Cummer was thinking about creating a museum, she was doing it out of her home. These were objects that she lived with and loved. And quite frankly, that's mostly how people consumed art throughout most of history. You either saw it in church, possibly you saw it in a large public building, or if you were of means, you lived with it in your house. And that's just a very different way of thinking about art. But the thing here for our purposes tonight is, again, how does the museum acquire art? The first way the museum acquired art was through the initial gift from the Cummer estate, which consisted of about 60 museum quality paintings, again, many of which you can see in this photo, and certainly many of which you can see on the walls of the museum. So one of those images is our Claude Lorraine, Minerva visiting the Muses on Mount Parnassus. Again, this was a gift of Nina Cummer, and I'm going to give you some insider information. You too can sleuth out all of this information just by being a good observer when you're in the galleries. You don't need me walking around with you, although I'm always happy to do that. If you take a look at the little plaques that we put right next to every work of art, those are called labels. And the first part of the label, they usually, if they either going to have one or two parts. The first part of the label is what we call a tombstone. Kind of easy to remember. What happens on a tombstone? You get all the basic information, right? Name, birth date, death date. That's basically all the stuff, the key facts that you need to know about a work of art. And then sometimes we have those extra paragraphs that give you some additional context. That's called the body of the label. But here underneath the Claude Lorraine, I put in what we would call the tombstone information that you would see on a label. So of course it says Claude Lorraine, that's who made this painting. The painting is called Minerva Visiting Muses on Mount Parnassus. It's from 1680, sorry. It's an oil on canvas. We don't usually put the dimensions on the label because you're in the gallery, and so this is big when you're in the gallery, but it's helpful to do on presentations. And this is when you get to the key information. It says bequest of Nina M.H. Cummer. So that's how we got this painting. This is one of Mrs. Cummer's 60 original bequests to the museum. And then that number that comes after it, that's basically just our inventory number. For the Cummer objects, the 110, that just means this really was the 110th object that was in Mrs. Cummer's will. Not particularly scientific or mysterious, really, right? So bequest, that's one way that we get works into the permanent collection. Another way, in fact, the most common way that works get added to the collection are through gifts. Ralph and Constance Wark were one of the first folks after the creation of the museum, so after Mrs. Cummer's original gift, to step forward and make a big contribution to the museum. Ralph had been collecting Meissen since he was a young man. He was born in Germany, and by the 1960s, about the time the museum was opening, he had 200, 300 pieces of Meissen porcelain in his personal collection. And like the Cummers, he didn't have any children, was thinking about what he was going to do with this collection when he passed away. And so in 1964, he made his first gift to the museum. So again, we opened in 1961, so 64 was really in those early years. And then over the course of the next 20 years, he ended up giving the museum the totality of his collection, which is about 750 objects. For those of you who have heard me say it before, it's always worth repeating. The Wark collection of early Meissen porcelain at the Cummer is regarded as the most significant collection of its type in the US and one of the top 3 collections of its type in the world. And that's because the objects that Ralph collected date to 1710 to 1760. So they are the earliest years of Meissen manufacture. So very narrow focus, those, the handful of years really when Meissen was the only creator of porcelain in Europe. This was a major scientific and technological innovation for its time. Kind of after 1760, that's when you start to see a lot of the other porcelain manufacturers creep in. So there were many more producers at that time, but really Meissen had the exclusive market for those years. So it's an amazing, amazing collection. And again, that would have been a gift to the museum. It also has an inventory number at the bottom of the label, at the bottom of the tombstone. You can see that here, AG 1973, 25, 1.5. Super scientific. AG just means acquired by gift. Nothing too mysterious about that now that you know what it is. 1973, that is the 4-digit year that the gift came into the collection. 25 means it was the 25th gift throughout that year. And 1 through 5 means, so far, at least that we can see in this photo, they were the first 5 objects given as part of that 25th gift that was given in the year 1973. Mystery solved. You can impress all of your friends now when you are at the museum. Another early gift that we got, again, really right after the museum opened, is a collection of more than 100 works on paper from the artist James McBay. He's a Scottish American. We received, again, more than 100 works on paper that were a gift from his widow in 1961. So right after the museum opened, and our collection of McBay prints is actually the largest in the US, so largest outside of his native Scotland. Gifts make up easily more than 60% of the museum's permanent collection. In the 60 years that we have been an institution, the permanent collection has grown from about 60 objects to more than 5,000. And again, the majority of those are coming in through gifts. Although we do have some purchase opportunities. This was one of our first purchases at the museum. Now that you are all sleuths, you can probably start to decode these accession numbers. AP 1964 means acquired by purchase 1964. And this, of course, is our fantastic Return from the Harvest by William Adolphe Bouguereau. For those of you who have been missing it, it is back on display, which is really exciting after being part of a national touring exhibition for a really long time. We just put it up in the galleries a couple of weeks ago. So here you can see on this tombstone, it says purchase with funds from membership contributions. So there are a couple different pools of money that we use to acquire artwork for the museum. Now these pools are dedicated funds. So they are not coming out of our operating dollars. They are restricted for art acquisition. So we can't pay for our electricity, we can't pay our, we can't pay salaries, we can't pay, electricity or anything like that. All we can do with these dollars is purchase artwork. But at the end of the day, the whole reason we're a museum is because we own art, right? So it's a pretty key component of who we are as an institution. Early in the museum's history, a lot of the ways that artwork was acquired were through just individual contributions. You can see here this, the Bouguereau specifically was from membership contributions. But later in the museum's history, there was an organization that was created, kind of a friends group of the museum, not dissimilar to Cummer Amelia, that was called the Cummer Council. The Cummer Council at the time was predominantly a group of women who thought creatively about ways to fundraise for art acquisitions. They started the annual Cummer Ball and Auction, which up until 2011 or 2012, the funds raised from the Cummer Ball exclusively went into art acquisitions. So thanks to the Cummer Council and anyone who had attended one of those balls, that really is one of the largest responsible parties for adding work to the Cummer collection. Here we're taking a look at this magnificent portrait by the artist Francisco Jacopo Foschi. And you can see here, purchase with funds from the Cummer Council, AP acquired purchase 1984 3.1. And, you know, I talked about the Cummer Council. We also have corporate sponsors who have stepped up and given dollars to support art acquisitions. One, again, of kind of the most notable art acquisitions that were acquired this way is Thomas Rand's Ponce de Leon in Florida. And you can see here that it was acquired for the people of Florida by the Frederick H. Schultz family. So that would be a family gift, Bank of America as well. So that was a corporate gift. And again, additional funding from that Cummer Council. So that's the ways that we acquire works of art, but how do we actually acquire works of art? What does that look like? As I said at the beginning, this is largely an invisible process that you don't get a chance to see unless you are a trustee or unless you happen to serve on a subcommittee of the Board of Trustees that's known as the Accessions and Artistic Affairs Committee. So that is a group of individuals, the majority of whom are trustees, but it is also open by invitation to different members of the community, some of whom are former trustees, but then there are just some folks who are close to the museum in lots of different ways, or perhaps collectors themselves. Now, they're the group who makes recommendations to the full board to purchase something or to accept a gift or to accept a bequest. I don't get to do any of that. I wish I could, but I can't. I have to work through these committee structures. I can make recommendations to Artistic Affairs about what I think we should be acquiring, whether that is coming as an offer of a gift or an offer of a future bequest, or if we want to use some of those dedicated dollars for art acquisition purchases to actually purchase something. But I don't get to make that final decision. I don't get to write the check. I just get to do all of the scouting and shopping and negotiating and shipping arrangements and all of the other things that go into it. But what is that committee, besides what I'm recommending, what does that committee take into consideration, and what sorts of things do they think about as they are deciding whether to recommend acquiring an object to that full board? So one of the policies and procedures that we have at the museum is a pretty hefty document called a collections management policy. And that's a little bit of everything about how we care for and maintain the permanent collection and the exhibition, or the exhibitions and the other objects that we are borrowing on loan. But a big portion of this policy is dedicated to acquiring works of art. And so that lays out several big conditions that that Artistic Affairs Committee is looking at kind of first off the bat. So what's in our collections management policy? We say that it has to be an original work of art. It must be deemed museum quality, which is kind of a subjective, amorphous term, but it is something that we spend a lot of time talking about. It has to be of a size and condition that we can actually take care of it, that we can maintain it, that we can store it, that we can display it. You know, we are not the Louvre, we're not the Met, we don't have endless gallery spaces, we don't have particularly large gallery spaces, and so we really have to think about, is this something that we can display and that we can maintain? Is it in a condition that we can maintain it? And then do we have the resources to be able to present it and preserve it? You know, one of the things that's an important reminder here is that, you know, museum collections are really supposed to be in perpetuity. Yes, you may have heard stories in the news in the last couple of years about what's called deaccessioning, or removing things from the permanent collection. That's a perfectly, you know, up and up thing that museums do all the time. But if you're deaccessioning an object from the permanent collection, it's because you have the intention of acquiring another work that may fit your collection a little bit better in that moment. Just like those restricted dollars for art purchases, you can't deaccession a work of art and then use those funds to pay your staff salaries or pay for air conditioning or anything like that. So you can deaccession, but you're not really supposed to, when you're accepting something, you need to think about it in terms of a long-term relationship and not just, we're going to accept it now and then we're going to sell it next year, we're going to trade it next year, anything like that. So you really have to make these decisions, take these decisions very seriously. One of the other criteria is that the work of art that is under consideration must have a clear relationship with the museum, the mission of the museum. We have a caveat in there that says we don't want to purchase to deplete all of our art acquisition funds. That could be something that other museums may choose to do. But again, we don't want to wipe out all of that pot of money on one purchase. We won't accept anything that it comes with restrictions. Again, other museums may think about it differently, but we want a clear ownership to the work no restrictions on our ability in the future to be able to show it or reproduce it. And then really the most important part, I think, of this policy is that the acquisition will be in accordance with any national or international treaties and conventions, whether that's taking a look at Nazi era provenance, whether it's taking a look at, the importation of ivory, illegally excavated antiquities from Central America and South America, endangered species. No eagle feathers or anything like that. So there's a lot, besides just looking at the work of art itself, there are a lot of other criteria that Artistic Affairs Committee is taking a look at when they're thinking about adding to the permanent collection. But then we have a second document. That's the collections management policy, is really the nuts and bolts of how you make an acquisition. But we have another document called the Collecting Priorities document. That's a little bit more of a strategic plan for the collection. It's a little bit more nuanced. And the Collection Priorities document outlines some criteria to clarify the value of a work of art being added to the permanent collection. So these are a little bit more subjective. And this Collecting Priorities document was written for the first time in 2011. It was a collaborative process between staff, not just staff in the curatorial department, but staff across the museum, as well as some trustees, members of the community. And then we interviewed a number of museum members, museum docents, museum junior docents, professors and art teachers in the school system and at the universities, just regular visitors to the museum, non-visitors to the museum, and asked them, what did they want to see when they came to the museum? And as part of that process, when we were taking all of that information and creating this document, we knew, the old adage, you can't make everybody happy all the time. And there was never going to be really an object that was going to meet all of these criteria at the same time. So we really decided that we wanted to consider works of art for the collection that at least met a majority of these criteria. So let's talk through what these are. Does the object clearly link to the educational goals of the museum? Does the work connect to other works in the permanent collection? So does it provide new perspectives on something that we already have? Does the work display clear connections to natural themes? Pat was talking about, this important resource we have in our historic gardens. And that's something that we're particularly interested in exploring, not just outside the building, but inside the building. So does an acquisition connect to natural themes, whether that's the environment, gardens, or the river. Does an acquisition add to the diversity of the permanent collection? And we define diversity really broadly speaking. It could be race, gender, or ethnicity, but it could also be, diverse, meaning it's an underexplored time period or an underexplored geographic period that we can't really speak to in our collection. Does the work support themes related to Florida history? That was something that we found interesting to consider. Probably the most subjective one that we talked the most about. Is the work buzzy? Does it have a wow factor? And what does wow mean? Wow means something different to everybody, but we felt like you kind of know wow when you see it. And so, is it something that you just get really excited about thinking about? And again, kind of thinking about those visitor and member surveys, does the work of art reflect the interest of our visitors, either through the surveys that we did as part of this process or through the surveys that we continue to do when folks visit the museum? So we'll take a look at a couple examples of how we have actually used these two documents together in the last couple of years by taking a look at, again, some of our more recent acquisitions. So these are two of our Andy Warhol series, 10 Portraits of Jews of the 20th Century, created in 1980. Here you're looking at Franz Kafka and Sarah Bernhardt. And you may remember when we had all 10 of them up not too long ago in the Stein Gallery. So one of the things about the Warhols that was particularly exciting, and kind of, thinking about those criteria again from the collecting priorities document, this synergy, right, between being able to show portraiture by Andy Warhol in the 1980s and mix that in with this whole timeline of portraiture that you can see in the rest of our permanent collection. That was something that we were really, really interested in pursuing for that reason, right? But, we don't have, at the time, we didn't have anything else by Andy Warhol. He certainly has a lot of buzz factor around himself and his persona. So that was a little bit of that wow factor, right? But then the subject matter, 10 famous Jews from the 20th century. There were men and women as part of that group of 10. So that helps us think about diversity in the permanent collection in a different way, not only because it represented an underrepresented time period as part of the permanent collection, but then we had Andy Warhol, and then we had the ability to talk about the biographies of those 10 individuals as well, who were figures from politics, arts, science, theater, a little bit of everything. And so that was a particularly compelling acquisition from a lot of those criteria in the collecting priorities document. Another one of our recent acquisitions was Emil Carlson's Copper Bowl, White Base Cloth and Onions. I try not to be biased, but this really is one of my favorite works in the permanent collection. It dates to 1890, but I think it feels a lot more contemporary than that. But in truth, Emil Carlson is really looking at 17th century Dutch still life paintings that were really very austere as his sources of inspiration. And the museum has some really great still life paintings in our permanent collection already. So by having something that was different from all of the other still lifes that we already had, again, that's making those connections between different time periods, different places, and different styles. That's one of the things that I think is most interesting about the nature of our permanent collection, that it really has that kind of breadth and diversity. Another one of our recent acquisitions is Paul Kelpy's Man and Machinery, this very industrial age landscape. That was one of the ways that we wanted to read this one. And this really very of precisionist style that he was using to capture inside of a factory in the 1930s. And again, the Cummer has some really fantastic landscape paintings, really other than the Edmund Greason that you see on the bottom left of the screen there. Most of our landscape paintings were pastoral landscapes, like the Heed, of course, Cummer Amelia Heed. But we really didn't have a lot of urban landscapes. And so that was one of the things, again, besides being a time period that we didn't have in the permanent collection, besides being a style that we didn't have represented in the permanent collection, this subject matter of kind of this more urban atmosphere was something that we didn't have. And so it helped fill a gap in the stories that we were able to tell. An acquisition from last year, these are actually 3 small drawings by an artist named James Castle. James Castle was an American artist who was born deaf and never learned to speak or to read or to write, but developed his own language through art making. Many of you have spent lots of hours volunteering either with our docent program or with what was formerly our very special arts festival, now Arts for All, a festival for children with varying abilities and their teachers and caregivers. And so, by acquiring these 3 James Castle drawings, which came into the collection as a gift, that helps us have more artwork in the permanent collection by folks who represent the types of audiences we serve at the museum. These are now on display in the Lane Gallery. So if you haven't been to the museum in a while, I would encourage you to stop and take a look at those. One of the other objects we recently acquired is this fantastic basket by Eastern Band Cherokee artist Shan Goshorn. It's called Zero Tolerance. Sean recently passed away, but Sean was known for her really amazing baskets that combined more or less traditional weaving techniques and traditional patterns, but instead of using reeds or grasses or other natural fibers, she printed on archival paper. And here you can see there's this teal, kind of a navy blue at the top, and this very vibrant purple in the middle. And each one of these splints, each one of these colors, which you can't see in the photo, but you can see it when you're up close and personal with it, she has printed various texts. So this basket, again, that's called Zero Tolerance, combines texts from a speech that was given at the Carlisle Indian School. The Carlisle School was created in the second half of the 19th century with the mission of, and this was literally their mission, their words, not mine, kill the Indian, save the man. And so there was text to that effect that was used in a speech at that school. And then some of the other splints feature traditional Cherokee songs of remembrance of their ancestors. But then Shan also included the words to the nursery rhyme 10 Little Indians, which if you haven't really thought about the lyrics of 10 Little Indians in a while, I would encourage you to go back and take a look at that and see it in a new light. And so while this is a really beautiful object and the craftsmanship is absolutely amazing, there are so many layers of interpretation in here. It definitely was one of the highlights in terms of an acquisition from my tenure at the museum. Of course, we started the presentation with Mildred Thompson's Magnetic Fields. That was a fairly recent purchase from 2019. Mildred was a Black artist who was born in Jacksonville and then actually left the States to live and study in Germany to really escape the sexism and racism that she was encountering here in the States. So, this again, thinking about those criteria, Mildred being born in Jacksonville, therefore had a great connection to us and to Florida here at the museum. But, you know, we didn't really have a lot of works, and we still don't have a lot of works from the 1990s. So this helped, again, kind of increase the spread and the diversity of the permanent collection in a different way. Tiffany Chung, if you haven't been to the museum, we recently put this one up as well. Tiffany Chung is a Vietnamese American artist who takes maps, UN migration numbers, census documents, lots of different documents, lots of different research. And she basically layers all of that information to create new versions of maps that really track the displacement of humans as a result of different conflict sites around the world. So this one in particular is tracking the displacement of Syrian refugees from April 2019. There's no way to get a good photo of this work of art. You have to come see it in person. Brooch Commissions is an Australian artist collective who takes and recycles Victorian furniture. So things, you know, pieces that are really considered out of fashion, out of favor, passe, but they salvage the wood and they create new sculptural works out of that. So all these different layers, right, of talking about trends and the evolution of trends, but also preservation and the environment and ecology. I mean, all of that Victorian furniture was made from a tree. You know, this is not particle board, this is not press board. And those trees were living things, and those trees were cut down to make those chairs and those dressers and those dining room tables that now today are just being discarded because stylistically they're not something that people necessarily respond to in the same way. So again, kind of this multifaceted connections back to the Cummer's collection, and also in this instance, a connection to the environment and the natural world that helps bring those conversations from outside inside and inside outside. With that, you know, all of the things that I just showed you are on display in the galleries right now. So I hope that the next time you are at the museum, you wander through those galleries and using some of the information that we've talked about tonight, I'll help you take a look at the labels in a little different way. And really, as you walk through, you know, just play a little game with yourself and whoever you're coming with, you know, purchase, acquisition, bequest, Cummer Council, Ralph Work, you know, all these, you'll start to really see how many individuals and corporations besides the Cummers really went into creating the institution that we see today. And I think it brings a whole new perspective to your visit to the museum. A great opportunity to come visit the museum will be yours in just a few weeks. The next exhibition in the Mason Gallery, Cross-Pollination, Heed, Coal, Church, and Our Contemporary Moment, opens for members on the 27th of this month. Basically, some of you may remember hearing me a couple years ago talk about Martin Johnson Heed, who was a 19th century American landscape painter who spent his final years in St. Augustine working out of Henry Flagler's Ponce de Leon Hotel, creating scenes of Florida landscapes. Heed was just one of many artists in 19th century America who were looking at the land and who were also pretty concerned about development, environmental protection, conservation, you know, the encroachment of industrialization and urbanization. And so we're taking a look at Heed, Coal, and Church, again, all 19th century American artists, and the works that they were making that were really responding to the environmental conditions of their day and their own concerns, and pairing that with contemporary artists who are not just referencing Heed, Coal, and Church, but are really bringing those same concerns into their own works. So here you see this fantastic work by Vic Nunez, who is very clearly spoofing there on Martin Johnson Head. So this exhibition is organized by Crystal Bridges Museum of Art in Bentonville, Arkansas, along with Olana, which is Frederick Church's homestead in New York, and the Thomas Cole Estate. And we're really excited to be able to bring this as our fall exhibition at the museum. In January, we'll be showcasing the Art Ventures 30th anniversary exhibition. Art Ventures is a grant-making program out of the Community Foundation of Northeast Florida that is designed to support artists from the Northeast Florida community. So we will be showing one grant recipient from each of their 30 years of grant making. The image that you see here is by Zach Freeman. And it's hard to tell from the photo, but this is actually basically a collage made out of found objects. So if you take a look kind of just above her eyebrows, things that look like buttons, they really are buttons when you get up and you get to see it in person. These are not things that he paints on top of. These are really just assemblages of found material, and it's really pretty impressive. I think you'll be amazed to see some of the local talent that we have in our community. And then something that we're all really looking forward to starting in March of next year, sporting fashion, Outdoor Girls 1800 to 1960. Those of you who've been around the museum for a while know that we like to throw in a good fashion show every couple of years. This one, though, had such a great thesis behind it. It really is taking a look at basically women's lib in a very different way. You don't necessarily think of women's liberation in 1800, but as women had more opportunities to actually get outside of the house, whether that was as spectator or participant, they needed a whole new wardrobe for these new activities that were suddenly open to them. And so sporting fashion really takes a look at a variety of women's clothing that was made from this time period, from croquet outfits to bathing costumes to this, really swanky motorcycle getup, and taking a look at how fashion then changed as women were encountering more and more opportunities. So we've got a lot of fun things coming up this year. As Pat said, it was a little bit of a juggle to keep everything on the calendar as a result of the COVID closures, but everything that was on the calendar before is still on the calendar, just in a slightly different spot than it was previously. And I hope you're as excited about this season as we are. And again, don't just come for the special exhibition, which of course is a lot of fun. Make sure that you're spending some time in the permanent collection too when you come to see us at the museum. I've loved being with you tonight. I wish that we were all able to be together in person, but I know that that is not an option these days with COVID. But I do hope everyone is healthy and well, and the same can be said of your families. And I hope that we can see you at the museum sometime sooner rather than later.